She cried, "I'll never bear you sons." The Comanche warrior smiled, his eyes soft as prairie grass. "You've already given me a reason to stay." Texas, 1867. The land stretched wide and unbroken, a sea of gold beneath an endless sky. The air tasted of dust and distant rain, of cedar smoke and wild sage. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the rolling plains, where buffalo grass bent and whispered secrets only the wind could hear. Hazel Tucker stood at the edge of the trading post, her carpetbag clutched tight in both hands. Her dress was the color of storm clouds, travel-worn and patched at the hem. Dust clung to her boots, to the strands of dark hair that had escaped her bun. She was 31 years old, though grief had carved lines around her eyes that made her seem older. Her gaze was steady, her jaw set with the kind of quiet determination that comes only from surviving what should have broken you. The trading post was little more than a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the vastness. Rough timber walls, a sagging porch, and windows clouded with years of grime. Men lounged outside, spitting tobacco and eyeing her with curiosity that made her skin prickle. She kept her chin up, her shoulders square. She had not come this far to be chased off by stares. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of leather, gunpowder, and unwashed bodies. The trader, a barrel-chested man with a beard like steel wool, looked up from his ledger. His eyes narrowed as he took her in, from her worn dress to the medical bag slung over her shoulder. "Help you, ma'am?" His voice was gruff, not unkind, but weighted with suspicion. "I'm looking for Passage West," Hazel said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I'm a midwife. I heard there's a settlement near the Brazos that needs one." The trader grunted, scratching at his beard. "Brazos country's rough, ma'am. Comanche territory. You sure you want to be heading that way?" "I'm sure," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Wagon train leaves at first light. Talk to Emmett Cole. He's the wagon master. But I'll warn you now, he don't take kindly to women traveling alone." Hazel nodded once, sharp and final. "I'll speak with him." She found Emmett Cole by the corrals, a lean man with sun-weathered skin and eyes like flint. He looked her up and down with the kind of dismissive glance that said he'd already made up his mind. "No," he said, before she could even finish her introduction. "No single women." "And too much trouble?" "I'm a midwife," Hazel said, her voice calm but firm. "I can pay my way and I can be useful. Women on a wagon train always need a midwife." "Don't care if you're the Queen of England," Cole said, spitting into the dirt. "Answer's no." Hazel felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of doors closing in her face. She had heard it before. Too much trouble. Too much risk. A woman alone was a liability, a burden. She opened her mouth to argue, to plead if she had to, when a voice cut through the air. "She can travel with me." Hazel turned. The man who spoke stood a few paces away, tall and broad-shouldered, his skin the color of burnished copper. He wore buckskin trousers and a plain cotton shirt, a knife sheathed at his belt. His hair was long, black as a raven's wing, tied back with a strip of leather. But it was his eyes that struck her, dark and deep, holding a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. Emmett Cole's expression soured. "Hamovi, I don't think—" "She travels with me," the man repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm riding west." "She can ride with me." "No trouble for you." Cole looked between them, his jaw working like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. Finally he spat again and waved a hand in dismissal. "Fine, but if there's trouble, it's on you." Hayamovi nodded once, then turned to Hazel. His gaze was steady, assessing, but not unkind. "You ride—" "Yes," Hazel said, though her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Good. We leave at dawn. Bring only what you need." He walked away before she could thank him, his stride easy and unhurried, as if offering to escort a stranger across dangerous territory was nothing more than a passing courtesy. That night, Hazel lay on a narrow cot in the back room of the trading post, staring up at the ceiling beams. Sleep would not come. Her mind churned with questions, with doubt, with the memory of the man who had spoken for her. She did not know him, did not know why he had helped her, but she knew enough to recognize that without him she would still be standing at the edge of the plains with nowhere to go. She thought of the life she was leaving behind, the small house in Austin, the practice she had built, the women who had trusted her with their births, their pain, their fear. And she thought of the reason she could no longer stay, the whispers, the sideways glances, the way people had begun to look at her after the scandal, after the loss, after everything had come crashing down around her. Her hand drifted to her stomach, flat and empty, and she closed her eyes against the sting of tears. She had delivered over 100 babies in her years as a midwife. She had held new life in her hands, had whispered blessings over tiny heads, had felt the fierce primal joy of mothers as they clutched their children for the first time. But she would never feel that herself, never know the weight of a child growing inside her, never hear a son or daughter call her mother. The thought was a wound that never healed, only scarred over, waiting to be torn open again. 3 years ago, she had been married. Thomas Tucker had been a kind man, a carpenter with steady hands and a gentle smile. They had wed with hope in their hearts and dreams of a house full of children. But month after month, year after year, her womb remained empty. She visited doctors, tried every remedy the old women whispered about, prayed until her knees ached from kneeling on hard church floors. Nothing worked, and then Thomas had died. A fall from a roof he was repairing, his neck broken in an instant. The town had mourned him, but the whispers had started soon after. Whispers that perhaps it was a blessing he had died childless, that perhaps Hazel was cursed, that perhaps God had marked her as unfit for motherhood. The cruelty of it had driven her from the only home she had ever known. She wiped at her eyes, angry at the tears, at the weakness they represented. She had promised herself she would not cry anymore, would not let the past drag her down. She was moving forward, building a new life, and she would do it alone if she had to. But the loneliness was a weight she carried everywhere, heavier than any carpet bag. Dawn came cold and pale, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Hazel gathered her things, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She had learned long ago to travel light, to carry only what was essential. Her medical bag, a change of clothes, a canteen, a worn copy of Gray's Anatomy that had belonged to her father. That was all. Yamovi was waiting by the horses, his own mount a sturdy paint with intelligent eyes. Beside it stood a smaller mare, chestnut with a white blaze, already saddled and ready. He nodded to Hazel as she approached. "This is Kaya," he said, running a hand along the mare's neck. "She's steady. She won't throw you." Hazel set her bag behind the saddle and stroked the mare's nose. The horse's breath was warm against her palm, and she felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Thank you." Yamovi said nothing, just swung himself onto his horse with an ease that spoke of years in the saddle. Hazel followed, her movements less graceful but competent. She had learned to ride as a girl, though it had been years since she'd done more than a short trot through town. They rode out as the sun broke free of the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains. The wagon train rumbled behind them, but Yamovi led them ahead, away from the noise and dust. The land opened before them, vast and wild, and Hazel felt something inside her loosen just a little. They rode in silence for the first hour. Hazel was grateful for it. She had grown weary of small talk, of the probing questions that always came when people learned she was traveling alone. But Yamovi asked nothing. He simply rode, his gaze sweeping the horizon, his body moving in easy rhythm with his horse. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with clumps of mesquite and the occasional stand of live oak. Hawks circled overhead, their cries piercing the stillness. In the distance, a herd of antelope grazed, their heads lifting as the riders passed, then returning to their feeding when no threat materialized. Hazel found herself watching Yamovi more than the landscape. There was something about the way he moved, so at home in this wild place, that fascinated her. He sat his horse as if they were one creature, responding to shifts in terrain before they became obstacles. His eyes never stopped moving, reading the land the way she read a patient's symptoms. Finally, she could stand the silence no longer. "Why did you help me?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You needed help. Most men wouldn't have bothered. I am not most men." Hazel studied him, trying to read the face that gave so little away. "Your Comanche—" "Yes, the trader called you Hayamovi. It means High Chief," he said, a faint trace of amusement in his voice. "Though I am no chief. Just a man who speaks English better than half the traders I've met." He smiled then, small and fleeting. "I lived among your people for a time. Learned your language, your ways. It seemed useful. And now I go where I am needed." They rode on, the sun climbing higher, the air growing warm. Hazel watched the land roll past, the endless sweep of grass and sky. It was beautiful in a way that was almost painful, so open, so free. She had spent years in crowded towns, in small rooms, heavy with the smell of sickness and blood. This was something else entirely. The heat built as the morning wore on, pressing down like a heavy blanket. Hazel's dress clung to her back with sweat, and she loosened the top button at her collar. Hayamovi seemed unbothered by the temperature, his face calm, his breathing steady. He pointed out landmarks as they rode, explaining the land with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime learning its secrets. "That ridge marks the edge of Kiowa territory," he said, gesturing to a line of hills in the distance. "We stay south of it, but the Kiowa hostile. To some, not to me, but better to avoid them. And your people, my people, move with the buffalo. They are not here now. They follow the herds north, but your sister, she married a man from another band, one that stays near the Brazos. She chose to remain when her husband died." Hazel heard the weight in his voice, the unspoken worry. "You care for her? She is my sister," he said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat. Hayamovi produced strips of dried meat and hard bread, offering half to Hazel without a word. She accepted, chewing slowly, savoring the simplicity of it. They sat in the shade of a lone mesquite tree, the only shelter for miles. "Where are you going?" Hayamovi asked, his voice quiet. "West," Hazel said, "to a settlement near the Brazos. They need a midwife, and after—" She looked at him, startled by the question. "I don't know. I suppose I'll stay if they'll have me." "You run from something." It was not a question, but a statement, delivered with such certainty that Hazel felt her defenses rise. "What makes you say that? You carry sorrow," he said simply. "I see it in your eyes." Hazel looked away, her throat tight. "Everyone carries sorrow." "Yes, but not everyone runs from it." She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that she was not running but moving forward, starting over. But the words stuck in her throat because she knew deep down that he was right. "I lost someone," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone I loved. And after that I couldn't stay where I was. Every street, every house, it all reminded me of what I'd lost." Hayamovi nodded slowly. "I understand. Do you—" "Yes," he said, and the weight in that single word told her he spoke the truth. "I lost my wife 3 winters ago. She died bringing our son into the world. He lived 2 days, then followed her." Hazel's breath caught. The pain in his voice was raw, unhealed, and she recognized it because it mirrored her own. "I'm so sorry." He looked away toward the horizon. "The elders said it was the will of the spirits, that some lives are too bright to remain in this world. I do not know if that is true. I only know that since then I have been alone. Is that why you help your sister?" "Yes, her children remind me that life continues, even when we wish to stop." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of shared grief settling between them like a third presence. Hazel felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough. What good did it do? "I can't have children," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "The doctors told me. After my husband died, I went to see them, hoping for an answer. They said my womb is scarred, that I will never carry a child." Hayamovi turned to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face. And this is why you run? I'm a midwife, she said, her voice breaking. I bring children into the world. I hold them, I care for them, and then I give them to mothers who can do what I cannot. Every birth is a reminder of what I've lost, what I'll never have. You think this makes you less, doesn't it? The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with bitterness. No, Hayamovi said firmly. A woman's worth is not measured by her womb. Hazel laughed, a harsh sound. Tell that to the women in Austin. Tell that to the men who look at me like I'm broken. They are fools. She looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. His jaw was set, his eyes blazing with an anger she had not seen before. A woman who brings life into the world, who eases pain, who comforts the dying. She has more worth than 1,000 men who do nothing but take, he said. You are not broken. You are strong. Hazel felt something crack inside her, a wall she had built to protect herself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, and she turned away, ashamed. But Hayamovi did not look away. He did not tell her to stop crying, did not offer empty platitudes. He simply sat with her, his presence steady and unyielding, until the storm passed. When she finally wiped her eyes and looked at him again, he handed her his canteen. She drank, the water cool and clean, and felt something shift inside her. Not healing, not yet, but the first small step toward it. They rode on through the afternoon, the land unchanging, the sky vast above them. Hazel found herself watching him again, but this time with a different kind of curiosity. Who was this man who had lost everything, yet still found the strength to care for others? Who had seen her at her weakest and offered not pity, but respect, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Hayamovi led them to a small creek bordered by cottonwoods. We camp here, he said. Hazel dismounted, her legs stiff from the long ride. She tended to Kaya, unsaddling her and leading her to the water, while Hayamovi gathered wood for a fire. The routine was oddly comforting, the simple tasks grounding her in the present. When the fire was lit and the horses settled, they sat across from each other, the flames dancing between them. Hayamovi cooked more of the dried meat over the fire, and Hazel watched in silence, grateful for the warmth, for the food, for the strange sense of safety she felt in his presence. You never told me why you're going west, she said after a while. Hayamovi looked up, his face shadowed by the firelight. I go to my people. There is a village near the Brazos. My sister lives there. Your sister? Yes, she has children. 3 boys. Their father was killed 2 winters ago. She needs help. Hazel's chest tightened. I'm sorry, he shrugged, but there was pain in the gesture. It is the way of things. We survive or we do not. That's a hard way to live. It is the only way I know. They lapsed into silence again, but it was different now, less guarded. Hazel felt the wall she had built around herself begin to crack, just a little. There was something about this man, this stranger who had offered her a path forward when all others had been closed, that made her want to trust him. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, its voice lonely and wild. Hazel wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was out here. How far from anything familiar? Are you afraid? Hayamovi asked, his voice soft. She considered lying, but what was the point? Yes, good. Fear keeps you alive. Is that supposed to be comforting? He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. No, but it is true. Hazel found herself smiling back, despite everything. There was something about his honesty, his refusal to soften the edges of the world, that she found strangely reassuring. As the fire burned low and the stars began to emerge, cold and bright, Hazel wrapped herself in her blanket and lay down near the warmth. Hayamovi remained sitting, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the fire's reach, ever watchful. Thank you, Hazel said softly, her eyes already heavy with sleep. He glanced at her, his expression softening. Sleep. Tomorrow is another long day. And as Hazel drifted into sleep, lulled by the crackle of the fire and the steady presence of the man who had chosen to help her, She felt something she had not felt in a very long time: hope. The second day dawned, with a sky the color of hammered steel, heavy clouds rolling in from the north. The air tasted different, sharp with the promise of rain. Hazel woke to the smell of coffee brewing over the rekindled fire, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory returned: the plains, the journey, the quiet man who had become her unlikely guide. Hayamovi handed her a tin cup without a word. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it chased away the lingering chill of the night. She drank it gratefully, watching as he moved about the camp with efficient purpose. Checking the horses, securing their packs, reading the sky with eyes that had learned to interpret its moods. "Storm coming," he said, his voice flat. "We ride hard today. Need to reach the canyon before it hits." Hazel nodded, pushing herself to her feet. Her muscles protested, stiff from yesterday's long hours in the saddle, but she ignored the discomfort. She had endured worse. She rolled her blanket, secured her bag, and mounted Kaya with movements that were becoming more familiar. They rode fast, pushing the horses harder than before. The land began to change, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills scattered with juniper and scrub oak. The wind picked up, whipping Hazel's hair loose from its pins, carrying the scent of distant rain. Thunder rumbled on the horizon, low and threatening. Hayamovi led them along a narrow trail that wound between rocky outcroppings, his attention fixed on the path ahead. Hazel followed close behind, trusting his judgment even as the sky darkened and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. The storm hit with sudden violence. One moment the rain was a gentle patter, the next it was a deluge, sheets of water driven sideways by howling wind. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark white flashes. Thunder crashed so close, Hazel felt it in her chest. "There!" Hayamovi shouted over the roar of the storm, pointing toward a dark opening in the canyon wall ahead. "Cave!" They urged the horses forward, slipping and sliding on rocks made treacherous by the rain. Hazel's heart pounded as Kaya stumbled, nearly going down, but the mare recovered and pressed on. Finally, they reached the cave, a wide mouth in the rock face that offered shelter from the fury outside. Hayamovi dismounted and helped Hazel down, his hands steady on her waist as her legs nearly gave out beneath her. They led the horses as far into the cave as they dared, away from the rain, but not so deep that the darkness became oppressive. Water streamed down the entrance, creating a curtain between them and the world outside. Hazel stood shivering, her dress soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. Hayamovi moved quickly, gathering dry wood from a pile someone had left near the back of the cave, remnants of an earlier traveler's stay. Within minutes, he had a fire going, the flames small but warm. "Take off your dress," he said without looking at her. Hazel froze. "What? You'll catch fever if you stay in wet clothes," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. He pulled a blanket from his pack and held it out to her, still not meeting her eyes. "Wrap yourself in this." "I'll turn away." Heat flooded her cheeks, but she knew he was right. With trembling fingers, she unbuttoned her dress and stepped out of it, wringing out as much water as she could before draping it over a rock near the fire. She wrapped the blanket around herself, pulling it tight, and cleared her throat. Hayamovi turned back, his expression carefully neutral. He handed her another blanket and gestured for her to sit by the fire. Then he removed his own soaked shirt, water running in rivulets down the muscles of his chest and back. Hazel looked away quickly, her face burning. They sat in awkward silence, the fire crackling between them, the storm raging outside. Gradually, warmth returned to Hazel's body, and with it, exhaustion. She hadn't realized how tired she was until the adrenaline of the ride faded. "How much farther to the Brazos?" she asked, more to break the silence than anything. 2 more days if the weather holds," Hayamovi said. He was working on a piece of leather, his knife moving with practiced precision. 3 if it does not, and your sister's village half a day beyond the settlement." Hazel watched him work, fascinated by the skill in his hands. "What are you making?" "A strap for my saddle," he said. "The old one is wearing through." She pulled her knees up under the blanket, resting her chin on them. You do everything yourself, don't you? He glanced up, one eyebrow raised. There is no one else to do it. That must be lonely. His hands stilled. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the leather in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Yes, it is. Hazel felt a pang of sympathy. She understood that loneliness had lived with it for so long, it had become a constant companion. Do you ever wish for something different? Wishes are for children, he said, but there was no harshness in it. I deal with what is, not what I wish could be. That sounds exhausting. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, recognition of a shared burden. Yes, he said simply. It is. The storm continued through the afternoon and into the evening. They had no choice but to wait it out, huddled by the fire, speaking in fits and starts. Hazel learned that Ryes-Key had been married young, barely 17, to a girl from a neighboring band. They had been happy, or so he said, though Hazel detected a note of uncertainty in his voice, as if he was no longer sure what happiness had felt like. She was called Kimimela, he said, staring into the flames. It means butterfly. She was like that, light, always moving, always laughing. When she died, it was as if someone had snuffed out the sun. How did you go on? Hazel asked softly. He shrugged. I had no choice. My sister needed help. My people needed hunters. Life does not stop because one person falls. But don't you ever want more than just survival? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then I do not let myself want. Wanting leads to hoping, and hope is a dangerous thing. Hazel understood that too. She had stopped hoping for a child, stopped hoping for a second chance at love, stopped hoping for anything beyond the next day, the next patient, the next small task that kept her moving forward. But sitting here, in this cave with this man who understood loss in a way few others could, she felt a tiny spark of something she had thought long dead. I used to want everything, she said, her voice distant. A husband, children, a home filled with laughter. I used to lie awake at night planning it all, imagining what color I'd paint the nursery, what songs I'd sing. And then Thomas died and the doctors told me the truth. And I realized all of it was just fantasy, not fantasy, Ryes-Key said. Just not meant for you in the way you imagined. She looked at him, confused. What do you mean, you bring children into the world? You ease their mother's pain. You teach them how to care for their babies. That is a kind of motherhood, is it not? Hazel's throat tightened. It's not the same. No, he agreed. But it is something. More than nothing. The words settled over her like a balm. She had never thought of it that way, had always seen her work as a painful reminder of what she lacked rather than a gift she could give. But perhaps he was right. Perhaps there were different ways to mother, different ways to matter. Night fell, and with it, the storm finally began to ease. The rain slowed to a steady drizzle, and the thunder moved off into the distance. Hazel's dress was still damp, but she put it back on anyway, too self-conscious to spend another moment wrapped in nothing but a blanket. Ryes-Key had turned away again without being asked, and she was grateful for his courtesy. They ate a cold supper of dried meat and hard biscuits, their supplies limited by the need to travel light. Ryes-Key rationed everything carefully, and Hazel understood why. Out here there were no stores, no neighbors to borrow from. What you carried was what you had. Tell me about your sister's children, Hazel said, wanting to know more about the family that awaited him. Ryes-Key's expression softened, the hard edges smoothing into something almost tender. Dakota is the oldest. He is 9 winters strong and brave. He wants to be a warrior like his father. Chayton is 7. He is quiet, thoughtful. He watches everything and remembers. And Sunny is 4. He is wild, always running, always laughing. He reminds me of his mother before sorrow found her. She must be grateful to have you. She does not say it, Ryes-Key said. But I see it in her eyes. She is proud, my sister. She does not like to need anyone. Sounds like someone else I know, Hazel said with a small smile. He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw him truly smile. Not just a brief quirk of the lips, but a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. It made him look younger, less burdened, and Hazel felt her breath catch. "Perhaps," he said, and there was warmth in his voice. They settled in for the night, the fire burning low, the cave filled with the sound of rain and the occasional snort from the horses. Hazel lay wrapped in her blankets, watching the play of firelight on the stone walls. She should have been afraid, alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, but she wasn't. There was something about Hiamovi that inspired trust, a quiet integrity that needed no words. "Hiamovi," she said softly, not sure if he was still awake. "Yes, thank you. For everything. You have already thanked me, I know, but I mean it." There was a pause, then, "You are welcome, Hazel Tucker." It was the first time he had used her full name, and hearing it from his lips sent a strange flutter through her chest. She closed her eyes, willing sleep to come, but her mind was too full of thoughts, of questions, of the unfamiliar warmth that had taken root somewhere deep inside her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The third day dawned clear and bright. The storm washed away as if it had never been. The air smelled clean, fresh, and the world seemed reborn. They broke camp quickly, eager to make up for lost time. The trail led them down into a valley where a river ran swift and cold, swollen with rain. "We cross here," Hiamovi said, studying the water with a critical eye. "It will be deep, but the horses can manage." Hazel eyed the churning current with trepidation. "Are you sure?" "No other way," he said simply. He went first, urging his paint into the water. The horse balked, ears flattening, but Hiamovi spoke to him in low, soothing tones, and the animal obeyed. The water rose quickly up to the horse's chest, and Hiamovi lifted his legs high to keep them dry. "Come," he called back to Hazel. "Follow exactly where I go." Hazel took a deep breath and nudged Kaya forward. The mare stepped into the river reluctantly, her body tense. The current grabbed at them immediately, trying to pull them downstream. Hazel's heart hammered as the water rose higher, soaking her skirts, making them heavy. Halfway across, Kaya stumbled. Hazel felt the mare's footing slip, felt the terrifying moment of weightlessness as the current seized them. She cried out, clutching at the saddle horn, but the water was too strong. Suddenly, Hiamovi was there. He had turned his horse back, driving through the current with fierce determination. His hand shot out, grabbing Kaya's bridle, steadying the mare. "Hold on!" he shouted over the roar of the water. Hazel clung to the saddle with all her strength as Hiamovi hauled them forward, his face set with concentration. His paint fought against the current, muscles straining, but the horse was strong and sure-footed. Slowly, agonizingly, they made progress, until finally the riverbed rose beneath them, and they stumbled onto the far bank. Hazel slid from the saddle, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Hiamovi dismounted and caught her before she fell, his arms strong and steady around her. For a moment they stood like that, dripping and breathless, and Hazel was acutely aware of the heat of his body, the solid strength of him. "You are safe," he said, his voice low. She looked up at him, at the concern in his dark eyes, and felt something shift inside her. This man, this stranger who owed her nothing, had risked his life to save hers. The realization was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered, and this time the words felt inadequate, too small to contain what she felt. He released her slowly, as if reluctant to let go, and stepped back. "We should keep moving," he said, but his voice was rougher than usual. They rode on through the afternoon, the sun warm on their backs, drying their wet clothes. The land continued to change, becoming more rugged, more wild. They passed through groves of pecan trees and meadows thick with bluebonnets, their color so vivid it hurt to look at them. As evening approached, they crested a rise, and Hazel saw smoke in the distance, thin columns rising into the sky. "Is that the settlement?" she asked. "Yes," Hyamovi said. "We will reach it tomorrow." There was something in his tone, a flatness that made Hazel glance at him. "What's wrong?" He was quiet for a moment, then, "Tomorrow we part ways. You go to the settlement, I go to my sister." The words hit Hazel harder than they should have. Of course they would part ways. That had always been the plan. But somehow, over these past 3 days, she had forgotten that this was temporary, that Hyamovi was not her companion, but her guide, and guides did not stay. "I see," she said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. They made camp in a grove of live oaks, the trees twisted and ancient, their branches draped with Spanish moss. Hyamovi built the fire, while Hazel tended the horses, both of them moving in the easy rhythm they had developed. But there was a tension now, an awareness of endings. That night, they sat by the fire longer than usual, neither ready to sleep. Hazel found herself memorizing details, the way the firelight caught in Hyamovi's hair, the line of his jaw, the calluses on his hands. She told herself she was being foolish, that she had known this man for mere days, that whatever she felt was just gratitude mixed with loneliness. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. "What will you do?" Hyamovi asked. "When you reach the settlement?" "Find the families who need a midwife," Hazel said. "Build a practice, make a life, alone." The question stung because it was true. Yes, alone. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "You do not have to be—" Hazel's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, a sound cut through the night. A cry, distant but unmistakable, human and filled with pain. Hyamovi was on his feet in an instant, his hand on his knife. "Stay here," he commanded. "No," Hazel said, rising as well. "If someone's hurt, I can help." He looked at her, jaw tight, then nodded once. "Stay close to me." They moved through the darkness, following the sound. It led them away from their camp, through the trees, to a small clearing where a wagon stood tilted on a broken wheel. A man lay on the ground, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. A woman knelt beside him, her face streaked with tears. "Please," she sobbed when she saw them. "Please help us." Hazel rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the injured man. One look told her what she needed to know. The leg was broken, badly, the bone visible through torn flesh. "We need to set it," she said, looking up at Hyamovi. "Now, before infection sets in." He nodded, moving to help. The woman watched, hope and fear warring on her face. And as Hazel worked, her hands steady despite the urgency, she felt Hyamovi's presence beside her, solid and sure, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, at least for one more night. The man's name was Samuel Crawford, and his wife was Ruth. They had been traveling from San Antonio to join family in the settlement when their wagon wheel shattered on a hidden rock. Samuel had tried to climb down to assess the damage and had fallen, his leg twisting beneath him with a sickening crack. Hazel worked by firelight, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of years spent tending to broken bodies. Hyamovi held Samuel down as she manipulated the bone back into place, the man's screams tearing through the night. Ruth sobbed, clutching her husband's hand, whispering prayers and apologies. "The bone is set," Hazel said finally, sitting back on her heels. Sweat dripped down her face despite the cool night air. "But he needs proper splinting and rest. He cannot travel for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer." Ruth's face crumpled. "But we have no money for a doctor, no place to stay. We were supposed to reach my brother's farm by tomorrow." Hazel glanced at Hyamovi, who stood silent in the shadows, his expression unreadable. Then she made her decision. "We'll take you to the settlement. There must be someone who can give you shelter until he heals." "We cannot pay you," Ruth said, her voice breaking. "I'm not asking you to," Hazel replied firmly. She turned to Hyamovi. Can we move them? He studied the wagon, then nodded. I can fix the wheel enough to get it there. It will be slow, but possible. They worked through the night. Hayamovi fashioned a makeshift splint from branches and strips of cloth Hazel tore from her own petticoat. Then he turned his attention to the wagon, using skills Hazel could only marvel at. He braced the broken wheel with rope and wood, securing it so it would hold just long enough to reach the settlement. By dawn, Samuel was bundled in blankets. In the back of the wagon, drifting in and out of consciousness from the laudanum Hazel had given him. Ruth sat beside him, her hand never leaving his, her eyes red-rimmed but grateful. Hazel tied Kaya to the back of the wagon and climbed up onto the seat beside Hayamovi, who had taken the reins. "You did not have to do this," he said quietly as they began to move. "Yes, I did," Hazel replied. "It's what I do." He glanced at her, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. "You have a good heart, or a foolish one," she said, but she smiled despite herself. The journey to the settlement took the entire day. The wagon moved at a crawl, every bump and jostle making Samuel cry out in pain. Hazel climbed into the back twice to check on him, adjusting the splint and giving him more laudanum. Ruth thanked her each time with such fervent gratitude that Hazel found herself uncomfortable with the praise. As the sun began its descent, the settlement finally came into view. It was larger than Hazel had expected, a collection of perhaps 30 buildings clustered along a bend in the Brazos River. She could see a church steeple, a general store, and what looked like a small schoolhouse. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of hammering echoed across the distance. Hayamovi guided the wagon down the main street, drawing curious stares from the people they passed. A white woman and a Comanche man traveling together was unusual enough, but add an injured settler and the curiosity became palpable. Whispers followed in their wake. "Where is the doctor?" Hazel called out to a woman standing on a porch. The woman pointed toward a building at the far end of the street. "Dr. Brennan's office. But he's not there. He left 3 days ago to tend to a rancher up north. Won't be back for a week at least." Hazel's heart sank. She looked at Hayamovi, who met her gaze with calm understanding. "Then we find another way," he said. A man emerged from the general store, wiping his hands on an apron. He was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a weathered face. "You folks need help. This man has a broken leg," Hazel said. "He needs a place to rest and heal. Is there anyone who can take them in?" The man studied Samuel's pale face, then nodded. "My wife and I have a room behind the store. It's not much, but it's clean and dry. Bring him in." Relief flooded through Hazel. With Hayamovi's help, they carefully transferred Samuel into the small room, settling him onto a narrow bed. Ruth hovered anxiously, tucking blankets around her husband. The storekeeper's wife, a plump woman with gentle hands, brought water and fresh bandages. "I'll check on him daily," Hazel promised Ruth, "and I'll teach you how to care for the wound and watch for signs of infection." Ruth grabbed Hazel's hands, tears streaming down her face. "You are an angel, a true angel. I will never forget this kindness." Hazel extracted herself as gently as she could and stepped outside where Hayamovi waited with the horses. The sun had set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The settlement was settling into evening routines, lamps being lit, doors closing, the day winding down. "You should stay here tonight," Hayamovi said. "Rest. Tomorrow you can begin your work." Hazel looked at him, at the strong lines of his face now familiar to her, and felt a sharp pang of loss. "And you—" "I leave for my sister's village at dawn." The words hung between them, heavy with finality. Hazel wanted to ask him to stay, wanted to tell him that she wasn't ready to say goodbye, but the words stuck in her throat. What claim did she have on him? What right did she have to ask him to abandon his obligations? "I see," she said instead, her voice carefully neutral. The storekeeper emerged from the building. "You folks are welcome to sleep in the stable tonight. It's warm and dry and there's fresh hay." Hayamovi nodded his thanks. They led the horses to the stable, a sturdy structure that smelled of leather and grain. True to the man's word, there were piles of clean hay and several empty stalls. Hazel settled Kaya while Hiamovi tended to his paint, both of them moving in the companionable silence that had become natural between them. But tonight the silence felt different, charged, full of things unsaid. They sat in the hay, sharing the last of their dried meat. Hazel's stomach growled despite the meager meal, and she realized she hadn't eaten properly in days. Tomorrow, she would need to find real food, establish herself, begin the work of building a new life. But tonight, all she could think about was the man sitting beside her, and the fact that by morning, he would be gone. "Your sister is lucky to have you," she said finally, needing to break the silence. "She would not say so," Hiamovi replied with a trace of amusement. "She thinks I worry too much. Do you?" "Yes. But someone must." Hazel smiled despite the ache in her chest. "Will you tell her about me?" He looked at her then, his dark eyes searching her face. "What would you have me say?" "I don't know," Hazel admitted. "That you met a broken woman trying to run from her past." "You're not broken," Hiamovi said, his voice sharp. "And you are not running. You are surviving. There is honor in that." Hazel felt tears prick at her eyes. How was it that this man, who had known her for mere days, saw her more clearly than anyone she had left behind? "I wish things were different," she whispered. "Different how?" She couldn't answer, couldn't put into words the confused tangle of feelings that had taken root in her heart. So instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm, rough with calluses, and she felt him tense at the contact. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For seeing me when no one else would. For treating me like I mattered." Hiamovi turned his hand over, his fingers closing gently around hers. "You do matter, Hazel Tucker. More than you know." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, neither speaking. The stable was quiet, except for the soft sounds of the horses and the distant murmur of the settlement bedding down for the night. Hazel memorized the feeling of his hand in hers, knowing that tomorrow it would be nothing but a memory. Finally, reluctantly, she pulled away. "We should sleep. You have a long ride tomorrow?" Hiamovi nodded, but his eyes never left her face. "And you have a new life to begin." They settled into their separate piles of hay, the distance between them feeling like a chasm. Hazel lay staring up at the stable roof, listening to Hiamovi's breathing slow and deepen as he fell asleep. But sleep eluded her. Her mind churned with questions, with regrets, with the growing certainty that letting him ride away in the morning would be a mistake she would regret for the rest of her life. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to the sound of movement. Dawn light filtered through the cracks in the stable walls, painting everything in shades of gold. Hiamovi was already up, saddling his horse, his movements efficient and practiced. Hazel sat up, hay clinging to her dress. "You're leaving now?" "Yes, I want to reach the village before midday." She stood, brushing herself off, feeling the weight of goodbye pressing down on her. "Will I see you again?" He paused, his hand resting on his horse's neck. For a long moment he didn't answer. "Then I do not know." The honesty of it hurt worse than a lie would have. Hazel wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warming day. "Then I suppose this is farewell." Hiamovi crossed the stable in 3 long strides and stopped directly in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I do not want to say goodbye to you," he said, his voice low and intense. Hazel's breath caught. "Then don't. My sister needs me. Her children need me." "I know, but I will think of you," he continued, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him. "I will wonder if you are safe, if you are happy, if you have found the life you seek." "Hiamovi," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. He raised his hand, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate, and it made Hazel's heart ache with longing. "You deserve good things, Hazel Tucker. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Then he stepped back, the moment broken. He swung himself onto his horse with practiced ease and looked down at her one last time. "Be well," he said. "You too," she managed, her voice barely audible. He turned his horse toward the stable door, and Hazel watched him ride away, watched until he disappeared around a building and was swallowed by the morning. Only then did she let the tears fall, hot and bitter, mourning something that had never quite been but might have been. Given time, she stood there for a long time, crying in the empty stable, feeling more alone than she had in months. Finally, she wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders, and turned to face the settlement. She had work to do, a life to build, and she would do it because that was what she did. She survived. The storekeeper's wife, whose name was Martha, found her an hour later. "You poor dear," she said, taking in Hazel's red eyes and rumpled appearance. "Come inside. You need a proper meal and a wash." Hazel followed her into the store's living quarters, a cozy space filled with the smell of baking bread and coffee. Martha sat her down at a wooden table and placed a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of her. "Eat," she commanded. "You look like you haven't had a decent meal in a week." Hazel ate mechanically, the food tasteless despite its obvious quality. Martha bustled around the kitchen, chattering about the settlement, the people who lived there, the families who might need a midwife. Hazel tried to focus, to absorb the information, but her mind kept drifting back to dark eyes and gentle hands. "There's a woman, Sarah Clemens, lives on a farm about 2 miles east," Martha was saying. "She's expecting her 4th child any day now. Lost the last one in childbirth. The baby died, and Sarah nearly did too. She's terrified this time. Could use someone with a steady hand and a kind heart." That caught Hazel's attention. "I can go to her today," Martha nodded approvingly. "Good. She needs the reassurance. And there's the Peterson family. They have 5 children under the age of 8. The youngest has been sickly since birth. And old Mrs. Hartwell, her daughter, is expecting twins." Hazel felt something shift inside her, purpose, direction. This was why she had come. Not to wallow in loneliness and regret, but to help, to heal, to bring life into the world, even if she could never create it herself. "Thank you," she said to Martha, meaning it. "For everything," Martha patted her hand. "We take care of our own here. And something tells me you're going to fit right in." Hazel spent the rest of the morning establishing herself. She rented a small room above the general store, barely large enough for a bed and a washstand, but it was hers. She unpacked her medical bag, organizing her supplies with the meticulousness that had always calmed her. Forceps, scissors, thread for stitching, bottles of tinctures and tonics, clean cloths folded and ready. By afternoon, she was walking the 2 miles to the Clemens farm, her bag in hand, her purpose renewed. The land was beautiful in the daylight, rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, the sky a brilliant blue overhead. She tried not to think about Hayamovi, about where he might be right now, about whether he was thinking of her. The Clemens farm was a modest affair, a small house with a vegetable garden and a few chickens pecking in the yard. Sarah Clemens answered the door, her belly swollen with pregnancy, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. She was no more than 25, but worry had aged her. "Mrs. Clemens, I'm Hazel Tucker, the midwife. Martha sent me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, thank God, please come in." Hazel spent the next 2 hours examining Sarah, listening to the baby's heartbeat, assessing the position and health of both mother and child. The baby was strong, positioned well, and Sarah, despite her fear, was healthy. Hazel explained what to expect, what signs to watch for, and most importantly, she offered reassurance. "You're going to be fine," Hazel said, holding Sarah's hands in hers. "Your body knows what to do, and I will be here with you every step of the way." Sarah sobbed with relief, and Hazel held her, this frightened young woman who reminded her so much of herself. Scared, vulnerable, desperately in need of someone to tell her she wasn't alone. Over the next few days, Hazel established herself in the settlement. She visited the Peterson family, prescribed a tonic for their sickly child, and taught the mother how to prepare nutritious broths. She examined Mrs. Hartwell's daughter, confirmed the twins, and began preparing her for the complicated birth ahead. Word spread quickly. The new midwife was skilled, kind, and most importantly, she cared. But at night, alone in her small room, Hazel found herself staring out the window toward the west. toward the Comanche village that lay somewhere beyond the horizon. She wondered what Hayamovi was doing, whether his nephews had welcomed him with joy, whether his sister was grateful for his return. She wondered if he thought of her at all. A week passed. Then too, Hazel fell into a rhythm. Early mornings checking on patients, afternoons preparing medicines, evenings spent reading her father's medical texts by lamplight. It was a good life, a meaningful life, but it felt incomplete, as if a piece of her had ridden away that morning in the stable and never returned. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, as Hazel was returning from a visit to the Hartwell farm, she saw him, Hayamovi, sitting on his paint horse at the edge of town, watching the road as if waiting for something. Or someone. Hazel's heart stopped, then started again, pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She walked toward him slowly, afraid that if she moved too quickly, he would disappear like a mirage. But he remained solid, real, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that took her breath away. "You came back," she said when she was close enough to speak. "I could not stay away," he replied simply, and in that moment, standing in the dusty street with the afternoon sun beating down and the whole settlement probably watching, Hazel Tucker smiled for the first time in 2 weeks. Hayamovi dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the packed earth with a soft thud. He stood there, a few feet away from Hazel, close enough that she could see the dust on his buckskin shirt, the weariness around his eyes that spoke of hard riding and little sleep. "Your sister," Hazel began, her voice catching. "Is she well?" "She is well," Hayamovi said. "The boys are healthy. They have food, shelter, everything they need." "Then why?" Hazel couldn't finish the question. Afraid of the answer, afraid to hope, he took a step closer. "Because I rode away from you and realized that for the first time in 3 years, I did not want to be alone anymore." The words hit Hazel like a physical force. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammering beneath her palm. "Hayamovi, I told my sister about you," he continued, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying his vulnerability. "About the woman who brings life into the world even though she cannot bear children herself. About the woman who stopped to help strangers when she could have looked away. About the woman who made me remember what it feels like to want something more than just survival." Hazel felt tears sliding down her cheeks, hot and unbidden. "What did she say?" "She said I was a fool if I let you go," Hayamovi said, and for the first time she saw him smile, really smile, the expression transforming his face. "She said that a woman like you comes along once in a lifetime, and that I had already wasted 3 years in grief. She would not let me waste any more." Hazel laughed through her tears, a sound that was half sob, half joy. "Your sister sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Hayamovi agreed. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I do not know what I can offer you, Hazel Tucker. I am not a wealthy man. I have no land, no house, nothing but a horse and the clothes on my back. But I can offer you my heart if you will have it." "Yes," Hazel whispered, the word escaping before she could even think. "Yes, I will have it." He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her, and Hazel buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and sage and something uniquely him. They stood like that for a long moment, oblivious to the curious stares from the townspeople, oblivious to everything but each other. Finally, Hayamovi pulled back just enough to look down at her. "There is something you should know," he said, his expression growing serious. "If you choose me, you choose a life that will not be easy. My people, your people, they will not all understand. There will be whispers, judgment, doors that close in your face." "I know," Hazel said. "I've lived with whispers and judgment before. They don't frighten me anymore." "And my sister," he continued. "She needs help with her sons. They are wild, undisciplined. Their father's death left a hole in their lives that she cannot fill alone. If we are together, they will be part of our life." Hazel felt something warm bloom in her chest. "Children?" she said softly. "You're offering me children?" Hayamovi's expression softened. "They are not yours by blood. But they need a woman's guidance, a woman's love. My sister cannot do it alone. Neither can you, Hazel said, understanding dawning. That's why you came back. Not just for me, but for them, for all of us, Hayamovi corrected. I came back because I realized that maybe, just maybe, broken pieces can fit together and make something whole. Hazel reached up and placed her hand against his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the strength in his jaw. Then let's be whole together. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture so tender it made Hazel's breath catch. I must warn you, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. My sister Huyana, she has a sharp tongue and a will of iron. She will test you. Good, Hazel said with a small smile. I like a challenge. Over the next few days, Hayamovi remained in the settlement, helping Hazel with her work. He carried her medical bag when she made house calls, chopped wood for elderly patients who couldn't manage it themselves, and repaired broken fences and sagging porches without being asked. The townspeople watched with wary curiosity at first, but gradually they began to accept his presence. Hazel continued her rounds, delivering babies, tending to the sick, teaching mothers how to care for their children. And everywhere she went, Hayamovi was there, a steady presence at her side. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their pasts, their losses, their hopes. Hazel learned that Hayamovi had been a scout for the army before returning to his people, that he spoke 3 languages fluently, that he had a gift for healing animals that rivaled her own skill with humans. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. My grandfather was a medicine man, he explained one evening as they sat outside the general store watching the sun set. He taught me about plants, about the spirits that live in all things. Your people call it superstition, but it is knowledge passed down through generations. It's not superstition, Hazel said firmly. It's wisdom. Some of the best remedies I know came from old women who learned them from their grandmothers. Medicine isn't just about what you learn from books. Hayamovi looked at her with something like wonder. You truly see no difference between my people's ways and yours. I see healing, Hazel said simply. And healing has no color, no language, no borders. He took her hand then, threading his fingers through hers, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep indigo. 2 weeks after Hayamovi's return, Sarah Clemens went into labor. Hazel was called to the farm just after midnight, and Hayamovi insisted on riding with her, despite her protests that he should stay and rest. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They arrived to find Sarah's husband, John, pacing frantically outside the house. She's been laboring for 6 hours, he said, his face pale with fear. Is that normal? Every labor is different, Hazel said calmly, though her heart was already racing with professional concern. Let me examine her. Inside, Sarah lay on the bed, her face contorted with pain, sweat soaking her nightgown. She grabbed Hazel's hand when she entered, her grip desperate. Something's wrong, she gasped. It feels wrong. Hazel examined her quickly, her trained hands assessing what her eyes could not see. What she found made her blood run cold. The baby was breech, positioned feet first instead of head first. It was a dangerous complication, one that could kill both mother and child if not handled correctly. Hayamovi, she called, her voice sharp with urgency. He appeared in the doorway immediately. I need you to hold her shoulders. This is going to hurt, but I have to turn the baby. His eyes widened with understanding, but he didn't hesitate. He moved to the head of the bed, placing his strong hands on Sarah's shoulders, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. Hazel worked quickly, her hands manipulating the baby through Sarah's belly, trying to coax it into the correct position. Sarah screamed, tears streaming down her face, but Hayamovi held her steady, his voice never wavering. It took 20 agonizing minutes, but finally, Hazel felt the baby shift, turn, settle into the proper position. She nearly sobbed with relief. Good, she breathed. Now we wait for the next contraction. The labor continued for another 3 hours. Hazel never left Sarah's side, guiding her through each contraction, encouraging her when she wanted to give up, wiping her face with cool cloths. Imovi remained as well, his presence a calming influence in the chaotic room. John paced outside, too frightened to watch. Finally, as dawn light began to creep through the windows, Sarah gave one last, tremendous push, and the baby slid into Hazel's waiting hands. A boy, small but healthy, his cry loud and indignant. Hazel's hands shook as she cleared his airways, checked his breathing, wrapped him in a clean blanket. "A son," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have a son, Sarah?" Sarah sobbed with joy and exhaustion as Hazel placed the baby in her arms. The new mother stared down at her child with such love, such wonder, that Hazel had to look away, blinking back tears. It never got easier, this moment. The moment when life triumphed over death, when hope defeated fear. She felt Imovi's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm, and she leaned into him gratefully. Together, they watched as Sarah counted her baby's fingers and toes, as John was finally allowed in and wept at the sight of his wife and son, as a new family began their journey together. Outside, as they packed up her medical supplies, Hazel finally let herself cry. Imovi pulled her into his arms, holding her as she shook with the release of tension and emotion. "You saved them," he murmured into her hair. "Both of them. We saved them," Hazel corrected, pulling back to look at him. "I couldn't have done it without you." He cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes intense. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known, Hazel Tucker. You face death and fear without flinching. You give everything you have to people who can never repay you. You are magnificent." And then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Hazel pressed closer, her arms winding around his neck, pouring 3 years of loneliness and longing into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hazel rested her forehead against his chest. "Marry me," Imovi said suddenly. Hazel's head snapped up. "What? Marry me," he repeated, his voice firm. "Not because you need a husband or I need a wife, but because I cannot imagine facing another day without you by my side." Hazel stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "I can't give you children," she said, the old wound opening again. "I can't give you sons to carry on your name." "I do not need sons from your womb," Imovi said fiercely. "I need you, Hazel, just you. And if we raise my sister's boys together, if we fill our home with children who need us, whether they are ours by blood or not, that is enough. More than enough." Fresh tears spilled down Hazel's cheeks. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything," he said. "Then yes," Hazel whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her close again, and they stood there in the morning light, two broken people who had found wholeness in each other. Two lost souls who had finally found home. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church at the center of the settlement. It was a simple affair, nothing like the elaborate ceremony Hazel had imagined as a young girl. She wore a plain blue dress that Martha had helped her sew, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Imovi wore traditional Comanche clothing, buckskin decorated with beadwork his sister had sent. The townspeople filled the pews, their faces ranging from curious to disapproving to genuinely happy. Martha sat in the front row, beaming. John and Sarah Clemens were there, their baby sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms. Even the Peterson children came, fidgeting and whispering until their mother shushed them, but Hazel barely noticed any of them. Her eyes were only for Imovi, who stood at the front of the church, watching her approach with such open love that it took her breath away. The Reverend, a kind man who had spent time among the Comanche and respected their ways, performed a ceremony that blended both cultures. "Do you, Hazel Tucker, take this man to be your husband? To love and honor him all the days of your life?" "I do," Hazel said, her voice clear and strong. "And do you, Imovi, take this woman to be your wife, to protect and cherish her all the days of your life?" "I do," Imovi said, his eyes never leaving Hazel's face. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Hayamovi leaned down and kissed her, gentle and sweet, and the church erupted in applause. Hazel smiled against his lips, feeling lighter than she had in years. When they finally broke apart, she saw Martha dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, saw Sarah beaming at them, saw even some of the more reserved townspeople nodding their approval. After the ceremony, there was a simple celebration at the general store. Martha had baked a cake, and someone had brought a fiddle. Children ran around shrieking with laughter, while adults talked and ate. Hazel moved through the crowd accepting congratulations, but she kept finding her way back to Hayamovi's side, as if pulled by an invisible thread. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Hayamovi took Hazel's hand. "Come," he said. "I want to show you something." He led her away from the celebration toward the edge of town where the prairie opened up before them. There, tethered to a post, were 2 horses. His paint and kaya both fitted with traveling packs. "We leave tonight," Hayamovi said. "My sister is expecting us. The boys are eager to meet their new aunt." Hazel felt a flutter of nervousness. "What if they don't like me?" "They will love you," Hayamovi said with certainty. "How could they not?" They mounted their horses and rode out as the last light faded from the sky. Behind them, the sounds of celebration gradually faded. Ahead lay the unknown, a new life, a new family. Hazel should have been terrified. Instead, she felt at peace. They rode through the night, the stars their only light, the sound of hoofbeats their only company. Hazel thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Austin to the trading post, through the storm and across the river, to the moment when a quiet Comanche warrior had offered her a chance at a new beginning. She thought about the children waiting for her, 3 boys who had lost their father and needed someone to help guide them. She thought about Huyana, the sister-in-law she had yet to meet, who had sent her husband back to claim the woman he loved. She thought about the life she would build, not as a woman defined by what she couldn't do, but as a woman defined by what she chose to give. As dawn broke across the prairie, they crested a hill, and Hazel saw smoke rising in the distance. The village. Hayamovi pointed to it, his face transformed by a smile. "Home," he said simply, and as they rode down the hill toward their new life together, Hazel Tucker smiled too, because for the first time in years, she believed it home. The Comanche village sat nestled in a valley beside a bend in the Brazos River, sheltered by cottonwood trees, whose leaves rustled silver-green in the morning breeze. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sound of children's laughter carried on the wind. As Hazel and Hayamovi rode closer, she could see hide-covered lodges arranged in a loose circle, horses grazing nearby, women working over fires, while men tended to weapons and tools. Hazel's stomach twisted with nervousness. She had delivered hundreds of babies, had faced life and death situations with steady hands. But the thought of meeting Hayamovi's family terrified her in a way she hadn't anticipated. What if they rejected her? What if the boys hated her? What if Huyana resented her presence? As if sensing her fear, Hayamovi reached across the space between their horses and squeezed her hand. "Breathe," he said quietly. "They are just people, Hazel, flawed and human, like everyone else." Before she could respond, 3 small figures came racing toward them, whooping and hollering. The boys, Hazel realized, her heart clenching. They were beautiful, wild-haired and brown-skinned, their faces alight with joy at seeing their uncle. The oldest, Takoda, reached them first, his eyes sharp and assessing as they landed on Hazel. Chayton followed close behind, quieter but equally curious. Little Sani brought up the rear, stumbling over his own feet in his excitement. Hayamovi dismounted and was immediately swarmed by his nephews, all 3 of them talking at once, grabbing his arms, demanding his attention. He laughed, the sound rich and warm, and ruffled their hair affectionately. Then he turned and gestured to Hazel, who remained frozen on her horse. "Boys," he said, his voice cutting through their chatter. "This is Hazel, my wife." The word hung in the air. Wife. 3 pairs of dark eyes turned to stare at her with unabashed curiosity. Hazel forced herself to dismount, her legs unsteady, and walked closer. Up close, she could see that Takoda had a scar on his chin, that Chaitan's hands were stained with what looked like berry juice, that Sunny's smile was missing 2 front teeth. "Hello," she said softly, kneeling so she was at eye level with them. "It's very nice to meet you." Takoda crossed his arms over his chest, his expression skeptical. "You're white," he said bluntly. "Takoda." Hayamovi's voice held a warning, but Hazel held up her hand. "Yes, I am," she said calmly, meeting the boy's challenging gaze. "Is that a problem?" He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "My mother says white people can't be trusted." "Your mother is wise to be cautious," Hazel replied evenly. "Trust must be earned. I don't expect you to trust me immediately, but I hope, in time, you'll give me the chance to prove myself." Something flickered in Takoda's eyes. Respect, perhaps. Or at least surprise that she hadn't become defensive. Chaitan edged closer, his curiosity winning over his wariness. "Can you ride a horse?" he asked. "Yes," Hazel said with a small smile. "Though not as well as your uncle, I suspect. Can you shoot a bow?" Takoda demanded. "No." "Can you track deer?" "No." "Then what can you do?" the boy asked, his tone bordering on dismissive. Hazel considered the question carefully. She could have listed her skills as a midwife, her medical knowledge, her ability to read and write. But she sensed that none of those things would matter to this fierce boy who was testing her worthiness. So instead she said, "I can listen. I can heal wounds when people are hurt. I can tell stories. And I can learn anything you're willing to teach me." Takoda's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, a woman's voice cut through the tension. "Takoda, that is enough. Stop interrogating your uncle's wife." Hazel looked up to see a woman approaching, and she knew instantly this was Huyana. She was tall and striking, with the same strong features as Hayamovi, her hair worn in 2 long braids decorated with shells and beads. Her expression was difficult to read, somewhere between welcoming and wary. Hayamovi stepped forward and embraced his sister, speaking to her in rapid Comanche. Hazel caught only a few words. Her limited understanding gleaned from the phrases Hayamovi had taught her during their journey. Huyana's eyes flickered to Hazel repeatedly during the exchange, assessing, measuring. Finally, Huyana stepped away from her brother and approached Hazel. She was several inches taller, and her gaze was penetrating, as if she could see straight through to Hazel's soul. "And so," she said in perfect English, "you are the woman who captured my brother's heart." "I didn't set out to," Hazel said honestly. "It just happened." Huyana's lips twitched almost a smile. "The best things usually do." She circled Hazel slowly, her scrutiny making Hazel feel like a horse being evaluated for purchase. "My brother says you are a healer." "I'm a midwife," Hazel clarified. "I help women bring children into the world." "And yet you cannot have children yourself," Huyana said bluntly. The words were like a knife to the chest, but Hazel refused to flinch. "No," she said steadily. "I cannot. Does this make you bitter?" Hazel considered the question carefully. A month ago, she might have said yes. But now, standing in this village with these boys staring at her and this fierce woman testing her, she realized something had changed. "It makes me sad sometimes," she admitted, "but it doesn't make me bitter." "Not anymore." Huyana studied her for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Good. Bitterness poisons everything it touches. Come, you must be hungry and tired. We will talk more after you have rested." The lodge Hayamovi shared with his sister was larger than Hazel had expected, with enough space for multiple sleeping areas separated by hide partitions. Huyana showed them to a section in the back, a private space with fresh buffalo robes spread on the ground and a small fire pit. "This is yours now," she said. "I have moved my things to the other side with the boys." "We don't want to displace you," Hazel protested, but Huyana waved her off. "A married couple needs privacy," she said matter-of-factly. "Besides, it will be good for the boys to learn to give you space." Over the following days, Hazel began to settle into the rhythm of village life. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, so different from the structured, compartmentalized existence she had known in Austin. Here, Life flowed with the natural cycles of day and night, with work and rest intermingled, with children playing freely while adults went about their tasks. The women of the village were initially cautious around her, speaking in Comanche when she was near, watching her with curious but guarded eyes. Hazel didn't push, didn't try to force herself into their circles. Instead, she made herself useful in the ways she knew how. When a woman's child developed a fever, Hazel offered her herbs and showed her how to brew them into a healing tea. When another woman cut her hand badly while working, Hazel cleaned and stitched the wound with practiced efficiency. Gradually, the walls of suspicion began to lower. The women started greeting her, including her in their work, teaching her their ways, even as she shared her own knowledge. She learned how to tan hides, how to identify edible plants, how to cook over an open fire. Her hands, once smooth from city life, became calloused and strong, but it was the boys who proved to be her greatest challenge. Dakota remained distant, watching her with those sharp, assessing eyes, testing her at every opportunity. He would ask her to help with tasks she had never done before, clearly expecting her to fail. When she struggled to fetch water from the river without spilling half of it, he smirked. When she burned the first meal, she tried to cook over the fire. He laughed outright. Hazel bit back her frustration and tried again. And again. And again. She refused to give up, refused to let him see how much his disdain stung. Hiamovi offered to intervene, but Hazel stopped him. He needs to work through this on his own, she said. I'm a stranger who has disrupted his life. He has every right to be angry. Chayton was easier. He followed her around like a curious shadow, asking endless questions about her life before, about the settlement, about the babies she had delivered. He seemed fascinated by her medical knowledge, and would watch intently whenever she treated someone's injury or illness. How did you learn all this? He asked one day, as she prepared a poultice for an elder's aching joints. My father was a doctor, Hazel explained. He taught me to read medical texts when I was very young, and then I apprenticed with a midwife who showed me the practical skills I needed. Could you teach me? Chayton asked, his eyes bright with interest. Hazel's heart swelled. If you want to learn, I would be honored to teach you. Little Sani was the easiest of all. He had no memory of his father, no deep wounds of loss to overcome. To him, Hazel was simply a new and interesting presence in his life. He would climb into her lap while she worked, chattering away about nothing and everything, his small hands exploring her hair, her dress, her face with innocent curiosity. Hazel found herself enchanted by him, by his easy affection and boundless energy. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after their arrival, Hazel was down by the river washing clothes when she heard shouting. She looked up to see Dakota racing toward her, his face pale with fear. Come quickly, he gasped. Sani fell from a tree. He's not moving. Hazel's training kicked in instantly. She dropped the wet clothing and ran, following Dakota to a clearing where a small crowd had gathered. Sani lay crumpled on the ground beneath a large cottonwood, his small body terrifyingly still. Ujana knelt beside him, her face stricken, her hands hovering over her son as if afraid to touch him. Hazel pushed through the crowd and dropped to her knees beside the boy. Don't move him, she commanded, her voice sharp with authority. She checked his breathing first, relief flooding through her when she felt warm air against her palm. Then she carefully examined him, running her hands along his limbs, checking for breaks, for internal injuries. His left arm was definitely broken, bent at an unnatural angle. There was a lump forming on his forehead where he must have hit his head. But his breathing was steady, his pulse strong. As Hazel worked, Sani's eyes fluttered open. He looked up at her, confused and frightened, and then he started to cry. Shh, sweetheart, Hazel murmured, brushing his hair back from his forehead. You're going to be okay. But your arm is hurt and I need to fix it. Can you be brave for me? Sani nodded, tears streaming down his face. Hazel looked up at Hiamovi, who had appeared at her side. I need splints and clean cloth. And something for the pain. He moved immediately. And Hazel turned her attention back to Sani. She spoke to him softly. soothingly explaining what she was going to do, preparing him for the pain that was coming. Huyana watched with wide, frightened eyes, her fierce exterior crumbling in the face of her child's injury. When Hayamovi returned with the supplies, Hazel worked quickly and efficiently. She set the bone with practiced hands, ignoring Sani's screams, binding the splint tightly. Then she prepared a tea from willow bark to ease his pain and reduce inflammation. Through it all, she remained calm, steady, her training guiding her movements. When it was done, she lifted Sani gently and carried him back to the lodge, settling him on soft robes with his arm carefully elevated. Huyana followed, silent tears streaming down her face. "Will he be all right?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Yes," Hazel said with certainty. "The break is clean. As long as we keep it immobilized and watch for signs of infection, he should heal completely. Children's bones mend well." Huyana collapsed beside her son, pressing her face to his uninjured hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Over the next few days, Hazel tended to Sani constantly, checking the splint, giving him medicine for pain, entertaining him with stories to keep him still. The other women of the village came by with gifts, food, and small tokens of gratitude. Word had spread of how calmly and skillfully she had handled the crisis, and the last of their reservations seemed to melt away. But it was Takoda's reaction that surprised her most. The boy had been silent since the accident, watching as Hazel cared for his youngest brother. On the third day, he approached her as she sat outside the lodge grinding herbs. He stood there for a long moment, fidgeting, clearly struggling with something. "You saved him," he said finally, his voice rough. Hazel looked up. "I did what I was trained to do." "No," Takoda said fiercely. "You saved him. When my father died, no one could save him. The wound was too deep, the bleeding too much. But you saved Sani." Understanding dawned. This boy, this fierce, angry boy, was terrified of losing someone else he loved. And now he had seen Hazel snatch his brother back from the edge of danger, had seen her competence and care, and it had cracked something open inside him. Hazel set down a grinding stone and gestured for him to sit. He did, reluctantly, keeping his distance, but no longer running away. "I'm sorry about your father," she said softly. "Losing someone you love is the hardest thing in the world." "Uncle Hayamovi says you lost your husband," Takoda said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I did, and it nearly broke me. For a long time, I didn't think I could survive the pain. How did you—" "I kept moving forward," Hazel said. "One day at a time. One step at a time, and I found ways to help other people, which helped me remember that life was still worth living." Takoda was quiet for a long moment. Then so softly she almost didn't hear it, he said, "I'm glad my uncle married you." Hazel's eyes filled with tears. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and when he didn't, she squeezed his shoulder gently. "I'm glad too." From that day forward, something shifted. Takoda still tested her, still challenged her, but now it came from a place of curiosity rather than hostility. He started teaching her things, showing her how to track animals, how to recognize different bird calls, how to move silently through the woods. In return, Hazel taught him to read and write, skills that fascinated him, even though he tried to pretend they didn't. Chaitan became her constant shadow, absorbing everything she taught him about healing. He had a natural talent for it, gentle hands, and a calm demeanor that put patients at ease. Hazel began to think that perhaps, in time, he could become a true healer, bridging the knowledge of both cultures. And Sani, once his arm healed, attached himself to Hazel with the total devotion only a 4-year-old could manage. He called her mother without even thinking about it, the words slipping out naturally, and Hazel's heart broke and mended all at once every time she heard it. The seasons changed. Summer faded into fall, the leaves turning gold and red, the air growing crisp. Hazel worked alongside the other women, preserving food for winter, preparing hides, gathering medicines. She delivered 3 babies that autumn, each birth a reminder of the gift she had been given, the ability to bring life into the world, even if she could never create it herself. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Hazel sat outside the lodge with Hiamovi, wrapped in warm robes, watching the white flakes drift down from the sky. Inside, the boys were asleep, their breathing soft and even. Huyana had gone to visit a friend, leaving them with a rare moment of privacy. "Are you happy?" Hiamovi asked, his arm around her shoulders. Hazel considered the question. 6 months ago, she had been running from her past, broken and hopeless, convinced that her life held nothing but loneliness and regret. Now she had a husband who loved her, 3 boys who had claimed her as their own, a sister who had become a true friend, and a community that valued her skills and accepted her presence and doom. "Yes," she said, leaning into his warmth, "I am happy. No regrets." She thought about it, about the children she would never bear, about the life she had left behind, about the struggles and challenges that still lay ahead. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This life, these children, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." Hiamovi pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you remember what you said to me that day at the river crossing?" "Which thing?" Hazel asked with a smile. "You said you could never give me sons," he said quietly. "But Hazel, you have given me so much more than that. You have given my nephews a mother. You have given my sister a friend and helper. You have given this village a healer. And you have given me a reason to believe in happiness again." Hazel turned to look at him, seeing the love shining in his eyes, and felt her own eyes fill with tears. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," he replied, pulling her close. "My wife, my heart." Inside the lodge, Sani stirred in his sleep and called out, "Mother!" Hazel started to rise, but Hiamovi held her for just a moment longer. "He means you," he said softly. "They all do." And as Hazel went inside to comfort the child who called her mother, she realized that this right here, was what she had been searching for all along. Not perfection, not a life without pain or loss, but belonging, purpose, love in its many forms. She had come to this place broken and hollow, convinced that her inability to bear children made her less than whole. But in the arms of 3 boys who needed her, in the respect of a village that valued her, and in the love of a man who saw her not for what she lacked, but for what she gave, she had found completeness. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white, and inside the lodge, surrounded by the soft breathing of sleeping children and the steady presence of her husband, Hazel Tucker closed her eyes and smiled. She was home. 5 years had passed since Hazel Tucker became Hazel of the Comanche, since she traded her life of solitude for one filled with the chaos and joy of family. 5 years of seasons turning, of children growing, of love deepening in ways she had never imagined possible. The village had changed in those years, as all living things must change. Some families had moved on, following the buffalo herds or seeking better hunting grounds. Others had arrived, drawn by word of the healer who lived among them, the white woman who brought both her people's medicine and respect for Comanche ways. The village had grown, prospered, become a place where 2 worlds met, and sometimes, just sometimes, found harmony. Hazel stood now outside the lodge she shared with Hiamovi, watching the sun rise over the Brazos River. The air was cool with early spring, carrying the scent of new grass and wild plums beginning to bloom. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now weathered and strong, marked by years of work and service. Grey had begun to thread through her dark hair, though she was only 36. Hiamovi said it made her look distinguished, wise. She said it made her look old. They both laughed about it. Behind her she heard stirring from inside the lodge. The boys would be waking soon, though they were hardly boys anymore. Takoda was 14 now, tall and lean, his father's features emerging in the sharp angles of his face. He had grown into a skilled hunter and tracker, respected by the other young men of the village. But he had also learned to read and write with a proficiency that amazed the traders who came through, and he had become invaluable as a translator and negotiator. Jayton was 12, quieter than his brother, but no less capable. He had followed through on his early interest in healing, apprenticing himself to Hazel with a dedication that moved her deeply. He knew the properties of dozens of plants now, could set a bone as well as she could, and had a gift for comforting the sick and frightened. The elders had begun calling him Little Medicine Man, and the name had stuck. Sani was 9, wild and joyful as ever, though his left arm bore a slight crook from where it had healed after his fall. It didn't slow him down. If anything, he used it as a badge of honor, telling elaborate stories about how he had gotten the injury, each version more fantastical than the last. He was the village storyteller in the making, weaving tales that made children laugh and elders nod with approval. And there was one more now. A girl of 3 with her mother's fierce spirit and her uncle's gentle heart. Huyana had remarried 2 years ago, a widower from a neighboring band who had come to trade horses and stayed when he met the formidable woman who ran her household with an iron will and a loving heart. Little Ayana had been born a year later, and she had wrapped herself around Hazel's heart from the moment she drew her first breath. Hazel had delivered her, of course, had caught her as she slipped into the world, had cleaned her tiny body and placed her in Huyana's arms. And when Ayana had grown old enough to speak, she had called Hazel grandmother without anyone teaching her the word, and Hazel had wept with joy. "You are awake early," Hayamovi's voice came from behind her. Rough with sleep, Hazel turned to find her husband emerging from the lodge, his hair loose around his shoulders, his chest bare despite the morning chill. He was 38 now, and the years had added silver to his temples and deeper lines around his eyes. But to Hazel he had never been more handsome. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, moving into his arms. He wrapped them around her, his warmth seeping into her bones. "I was thinking, dangerous pastime," he teased, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. She laughed softly. "I was thinking about the day we met, about how terrified I was, how certain that I was walking into the unknown with nothing to guide me. And now the unknown has become home," she said simply. They stood like that for a long moment, watching as the village began to wake around them. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children emerged from lodges, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Dogs barked and horses whinnied, eager for the day to begin. "There is news," Hayamovi said finally, his tone growing serious. "A rider came late last night, while you were tending to the Thompson baby." Hazel pulled back to look at him, concern creeping into her chest. "What news?" "The settlement is growing," he said. "More families arriving every week. They have built a proper hospital now, and they are looking for someone to run it. Someone with experience, with knowledge of both frontier medicine and more formal training." Hazel's heart began to pound. "They asked for me," the Reverend sent word. "He said they need you, that women are dying in childbirth because they have no one skilled enough to help them. He said you could save lives." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility and complication. Hazel had continued to serve the settlement over the years, riding in when she was needed, delivering babies and treating illnesses. But she had always returned to the village, to her family, to the life she had built here. What Hayamovi was describing would mean something different, something more permanent. "What do you think I should do?" she asked quietly. Hayamovi cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes searching hers. "I think you should do what your heart tells you to do. And I think that whatever you decide, we will face it together. The boys are nearly grown," Hayamovi said. "Takoda will be a man soon, ready to make his own way. Chaitan has learned all you can teach him here. He needs to learn from other healers now, to see different ways of practicing medicine. And Sani, he will thrive anywhere as long as he has family around him." "You would leave the village?" Hazel asked. Hardly daring to believe it. "I would follow you to the end of the earth," Hayamovi said simply. "You are my home, Hazel. Not this place, not any place." Tears filled her eyes. After 5 years of marriage, he could still move her to tears with his quiet declarations of love. "I need to think about it." "Of course," he said, kissing her forehead. "Take all the time you need." But even as she said it, Hazel knew what her answer would be. She had spent 5 years serving 2 communities, splitting herself between 2 worlds. Perhaps it was time to find a way to bring those worlds together. to build something that honored both the traditional knowledge she had learned from the Comanche and the formal training she had received in her youth. Over the next few days, Hazel talked with everyone whose opinion mattered to her. She spoke with Huyana, who surprised her by encouraging the move. "You have given my sons more than I could have hoped for," Huyana said. "You have taught them to read and write, to think beyond the boundaries of our village. Now it is time for them to see the wider world, and for you to serve in the way you were always meant to." She spoke with the village elders, who blessed her decision and thanked her for her years of service. She spoke with the women she had helped through pregnancies and illnesses, who pressed gifts into her hands and made her promise to visit. And she spoke with each of the boys individually, wanting to know their thoughts, their fears, their hopes. Takoda was the most resistant at first. "The settlement is not safe for us," he argued. "They see us as savages, as threats." "Some do," Hazel acknowledged. "But not all, and things are changing, Takoda. Slowly, yes, but they are changing. Your uncle and I, we can be part of that change. We can show people that there is more than one way to live, more than one way to be a family. And if they reject us," he asked, his jaw tight, "then we will deal with it," Hazel said firmly. "Together, as we always have." Chayton was excited by the prospect. "A real hospital," he breathed, his eyes shining, "with books and instruments and other doctors to learn from." "Yes," Hazel said, smiling at his enthusiasm. "And you will learn from all of them. You will become a bridge between two worlds, Chayton. You will know the healing plants of your people and the surgical techniques of mine. You will be something rare and precious." Sani, predictably, was most concerned about whether there would be other children to play with and whether he could bring his favorite horse. When assured on both counts, he declared himself ready for the adventure. The decision made, preparations began. Hamovi rode to the settlement to meet with the Reverend and the town council, negotiating terms. He insisted that his family be treated with respect, that his nephews be allowed to attend the school, that their Comanche heritage be acknowledged and honored. There were some who objected, who said that Indians had no place in a civilized town. But there were others, including many of the women Hazel had helped over the years, who spoke in their favor. In the end, a compromise was reached. The hospital would be built on the edge of town, close enough to serve the settlement, but far enough to provide some distance from those who might cause trouble. Yamovi and his family would be given land to build a home, and the boys would be allowed to attend school on the condition that they also help maintain peace between the settlement and the nearby Comanche villages. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The day they left the village was bittersweet. Hazel had grown to love this place, these people, this way of life. She wept as she said goodbye to Huyana, who held her tight and whispered, "You are my sister now and forever." "Distance cannot change that," little Ayana cried, not understanding why her grandmother was leaving, and Hazel held her close, promising to visit often, promising that the girl would always have a place in her heart and her home. They traveled slowly, taking their time, allowing the boys to say goodbye to the land they had known all their lives. Takoda was quiet, his face turned toward the horizon, his thoughts his own. Chayton chattered excitedly about all the things he would learn. Sani made up songs about their journey, singing them loudly and off-key until everyone was laughing. When they finally crested the hill overlooking the settlement, Hazel caught her breath. It had grown even more than she had realized. New buildings lined the main street. Fields had been cleared and planted. Children played in a schoolyard that hadn't existed 5 years ago. It looked almost like a real town now, no longer just a rough collection of settlers clinging to the edge of the frontier. "It's big," Sani said, his voice small. Hazel reached down and squeezed his shoulder. "Yes, it is. But we'll be fine. We have each other." The hospital was still under construction, but it was impressive nonetheless. 2 stories, solidly built, with large windows to let in light and a covered porch where patients could sit and recover. Next to it stood a smaller building, nearly complete, that would be their home. The Reverend met them as they rode up, his face wreathed in smiles. "Mrs. Tucker, or should I say Mrs. Hayamovi now?" Hazel is fine, she said, dismounting. Reverend Thomas, this is my husband Hayamovi, and our sons, Takoda, Chaitan, and Sunny. The Reverend's eyes widened slightly at the word sons, but he recovered quickly and extended his hand to Hayamovi. Welcome, all of you. We are grateful you've come. Over the following weeks, they settled into their new life. The house was comfortable, larger than the lodge had been, with separate rooms for sleeping and a large kitchen where Hazel could prepare medicines. She had a proper examination room at the hospital with instruments and supplies she had only dreamed of before. The boys adjusted in their own ways. Takoda found work with a rancher who valued his tracking skills and his way with horses. He kept his distance from most of the townspeople at first, wary and watchful, but gradually he began to make connections to earn respect. Chaitan threw himself into learning, devouring every medical text Hazel could find, observing surgeries, asking endless questions. Ensani charmed everyone he met with his stories and his infectious laughter, making friends wherever he went. There were challenges, of course. Some people refused to be treated by Hazel because of her Comanche family. Others muttered about savages and civilization, making their disapproval clear. There was an incident at the school where a boy called Sani, a half-breed, and Takoda had to be physically restrained from retaliating. But there were also moments of grace, of unexpected kindness, of barriers slowly breaking down. One afternoon, 6 months after their arrival, Hazel was in the hospital treating a woman who had just given birth when she heard a commotion outside. She cleaned her hands and stepped out to find a wagon pulling up, a Comanche woman in the back, clearly in labor, her husband beside her looking terrified. "Please," he said in halting English. "My wife, the baby comes wrong." Hazel moved immediately, calling for Chaitan to assist her. Together, they examined the woman and realized the baby was breech, just as Sarah Clemens had been all those years ago. Hazel worked quickly, her hands sure and steady, turning the baby, guiding it into position. The woman screamed in pain and fear, crying out in Comanche, and Hayamovi appeared at her side, translating, comforting, helping to hold her steady. 2 hours later, a healthy baby boy slipped into Hazel's waiting hands. She cleaned him, checked him, wrapped him in a blanket, and placed him in his mother's arms. The woman wept with relief and joy, clutching her son, and her husband knelt beside the bed, his own face wet with tears. "Thank you," he said, gripping Hazel's hand. "You saved them both." Word spread quickly through both communities. The white healer who lived with the Comanche had saved a Comanche woman and her child. The barriers became a little more permeable after that. More Comanche families came to the hospital when they needed help. More settlers began to accept that Hayamovi and his family were not a threat, but a bridge. Years passed. The boys grew into men. Takoda eventually married a girl from a neighboring Comanche village and built a home halfway between the settlement and his people, becoming a true bridge between the two worlds. Chaitan became known as Dr. Chaitan, the first Comanche physician in Texas, practicing medicine that honored both his heritage and his training. Sani became a teacher, sharing stories and history with children of both cultures, ensuring that neither tradition was forgotten, and Hazel and Hayamovi grew old together. Her hair turned fully gray, then white. His face became lined with age, his movements slower but still sure. They worked side by side in the hospital, delivering babies, treating illnesses, training the next generation of healers. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Hayamovi took her hand. They were both 60 now, their bodies worn by years of hard work, but their spirits still strong. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The life you left behind, the children you never bore." Hazel looked at him, at the man who had given her everything she needed, even when she didn't know what that was. She thought about Takoda's children, who called her grandmother and climbed into her lap to hear stories. She thought about Chaitan's wife, pregnant with their first child, who had asked Hazel to deliver the baby. She thought about Sani's laughter echoing through their home whenever he visited. She thought about the hundreds of babies she had brought into the world, the lives she had touched, the bridge she had helped build between two cultures. "No," she said firmly. "I don't regret a single moment." Hayamovi raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me a reason to stay," he said softly. "All those years ago, when you told me you could never bear me sons, I told you that you had already given me a reason to stay. Do you remember?" "I remember," Hazel said, tears gathering in her eyes. "I want you to know that every day since then has only proven that truth," he continued. "You have given me a life beyond anything I imagined. You have given my nephews a future. You have given two communities a way to coexist. You have given hope to women who thought they had none. You are magnificent, Hazel. You always have been." Hazel leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body, the strength that had never wavered in all their years together. "We did it together," she said. "All of it. You and me." "Yes," he agreed. "Together." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Hazel closed her eyes and smiled. She had come to this land broken and afraid, convinced that her inability to bear children made her incomplete. But she had been wrong. Motherhood was not about biology. It was about love, about showing up, about choosing every day to care for those who needed you. She had not given birth to sons, but she had raised them, had shaped them into good men who would make the world better. She had not carried children in her womb, but she had carried them in her heart, and that was enough. More than enough. Behind them, through the open window, they could hear laughter. Takoda had brought his family for dinner, and his children were playing with toys Sani had carved for them. Chaitan was inside, discussing a complicated case with his wife, their voices animated and engaged. The house was full of life, of family, of love. "Come inside," Hazel said finally, standing and offering her hand to Hayamovi. "Our family is waiting." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years, and together they walked back into the warmth and light of their home. Behind them, the prairie stretched vast and wild, the same land that had witnessed their beginning all those years ago. But they were no longer the same people who had ridden across it, two broken souls searching for something they couldn't name. They had found it, in each other, in the family they had built, in the life they had chosen. And that, Hazel thought as she closed the door behind them, was the greatest gift of all. Love was not about perfection. It was about showing up. It was about staying. It was about choosing every single day to build something beautiful out of broken pieces. And they had built something beautiful indeed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.